The U.S. men's national team has seen an absolute explosion of growth over the last, let's call it 2 years. We're seeing American prospects playing in some of the biggest clubs in the world and some of the biggest competitions in the world. Christian Pulisic just won the UEFA Champions League, which is the biggest club competition you can possibly play in. On the other side was Zach Steffen, the backup goalkeeper for Manchester City. But beyond that, we're seeing Americans go to clubs like Juventus and Barcelona. We're seeing players leave MLS at a pretty crazy rate at the moment, going to all these clubs in Europe. So it's got us thinking, are the clubs in Europe sort of starting to change their perspective on what is going on in soccer in the United States? Is this thing that we know is going on over here, that the growth of the sport is growing tremendously, is that also happening across the pond? So I brought in a guy who I consider an expert in this particular field just because he lives in Europe currently and based in London, England. Jake from FIFAmerica. Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, what's up, everyone? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so like I said before, Jake is from FIFAmerica. FIFAmerica is a U.S. soccer channel that does all kinds of stuff. Jake has some great tactical breakdowns. He has some recaps. He does a lot of player highlight videos. He's got kind of a smorgasbord of concert content. And I think whenever you started your channel, you posted every day. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I'm still doing it until August 3rd.
Well, you are a relentless individual, because I don't think I could keep up that kind of momentum.
It's been tough. We're
So
there.
anyway, so before we can talk about like kind of the growth of the opinion of U.S. soccer and MLS and everything that we got going on right now, let's kind of establish like where it was. Because for so long, I think U.S. soccer was in sort of a similar position in Europe, where we had guys that were kind of breaking through, like Brian McBride and Carlos Bocanegra and Clint Dempsey, Steve Cherundolo over in Germany. But it was sort of in these kind of lower tier clubs, and they kind of established it in like this like workman-like mentality. Is that fair? Like, would you say that that's kind of where it was? That if you asked an English fan what an American player was like, they would say like tireless effort, get stuck in, relentless, like that type of thing.
The physical ability of the players is always going to be what people go to when they talk about Americans, especially in the last 5 to 10 years of history. And Clint Dempsey and Tim Howard are really the two players that most English people will talk about or consider when I say I'm American and I follow soccer. That's immediately who they go to. So I do think, yeah, when Clint Dempsey was at Fulham, very, very much like you said, a workman's attitude, just a very tough player that was hungry every time he stepped on the field. And that has kind of been the case for how they expect American players to be. And it hasn't really led to, improving the technical respect that American players do have now.
Yeah, because in that era, we always talked about, as U.S. men's national team fans, that there was a glass ceiling in Europe that Americans couldn't rise above because they would never be perceived as equal to their European or South American counterparts. And that's why we saw it was like so incredible whenever Clint Dempsey made that move to Tottenham, even though he never really established himself in that Tottenham side. But nowadays, we're seeing players kind of smash through that glass ceiling. So ever since Christian Pulisic arrived at Chelsea, we got Zach Steffen over in Manchester City, and then we see guys like Gio Reyna, who is one of the top teenagers in the world. We got Wes McKennie at Juventus. Is there like a change going on in that perception of soccer? And whenever people talk to you about soccer, did they accept that you actually know something about the game, or is there, you're an American, you don't know what you're talking about?
There's a lot to break down in that question, so I'll start. I think the easiest way to...
I saw the pain rush over your
Yes.
face whenever I took the question that direction. Let me interrupt Jake for 1 second to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, and that is OneFootball. OneFootball is the soccer app that has everything you need to know about the game that we love. You can track your favorite players, your favorite teams, your favorite leagues, all at the touch of a button, and you'll get push notifications whenever anything happens with your favorite players. Like, let's say for instance you heard the name Folarin Balogun in this video and you want to track him and see whenever he starts for Arsenal what's going on with him, if there's any news about him. You can actually look him up in the app, hit the little star by his name, and now you are locked into tracking everything that happens in Balogun's career. If you want to download the OneFootball app for free, you just click the link in the description of this video. It is totally free. Not only will you then have the most powerful resource for any soccer fan out there, but you'll be supporting the Anchor Report directly, and you'll be supporting a company that supports US soccer content creators like me. Now let's get back to Jake.
It's because it's the same kind of barrier that you have to get over every time, and I'll get to that, but like there is an expectation and a protection from the English people that this is theirs, and especially if you're American, then there's no way that you can know or understand as much about the game as they do. But let me start with when we played England in the World Cup in 2010. The English press put out a newspaper. I don't know if anyone will remember this, but they had the front page said easy, and it was an anagram for England, Algeria, Slovenia, and Yanks, because they thought that group was going to be easy for England. They were going to win it easily. The US won that group in the World Cup and moved on to the knockout rounds as the winner of that group. And I would say that from that time, it's 11 years later, the recognition of the American game has grown. People know that there are players out there that are capable and players out there that are good enough to play for the top teams. There's not really a consideration or a hesitation to say that someone like Christian Pulisic deserves the number 10 at Chelsea. But the respect for the broader landscape of the American player is definitely still lagging behind. Christian Pulisic is someone that everyone will point to in a very similar way as Clint Dempsey now. The other player you mentioned, actually, Gio Reyna, when I've talked to people about soccer and when they kind of click that I know stuff about the game and I know about players that are American, Gio Reyna is actually someone that comes up a lot for English people that I've talked to. And so it seems like Dortmund has quite a global profile, especially for developing youngsters. So it's kind of like this rabbit hole effect where if English people start to look into, oh wait, Christian Pulisic's American, like he's pretty good. Oh, he's only 22. Wait, I heard about this guy Gio Reyna on Dortmund. He's 17. Like I saw him in the Champions League. He looked pretty good. And then it just kind of like spirals from there with, oh wait, there's a whole team of Americans that are under 23 years old that are playing like Champions League caliber. But people need to make effort to go and find that. And I think it's similar to Americans, right? Like people that are really into the game will get to that point. But from a broader landscape, people that just enjoy soccer here and are kind of like the bring it home crowd, if you will, they don't really see anything above and beyond like the exception to the rule with American players.
Yeah. And, it has to be fair to say that the English don't have a rosy attitude towards most other nations' players. I mean, we even saw in the Euros where it seemed like Jadon Sancho was not looked at as a player that was start quality because he was playing in the Bundesliga. I mean, we don't know that that's true, but that's like the speculation from everyone. And then he gets that transfer to Manchester United, and next thing you know, he's starting a game. But that's something the English traditionally don't have a lot of respect for a lot of players that are playing in leagues outside of the EPL.
Yeah, and I'll say too, they refer to places like the Bundesliga as a farmers league or Liga as a farmers league. Like there is I also want to say this, there are good people that are fans of the English game that will appreciate and respect that someone like me who is American shows respect and appreciation for the same thing. And most of the time that is a good conversation that just takes me to say, maybe I know a Sunderland fan that I work with in my full-time job. And as soon as I knew that the easiest way to break ground with him was to talk about Josie Altidore,
Yeah.
DeAndre Edlin, and Lyndon Gooch.
Hmm.
I think just knowing the history of that club with the American players was an easy way to then gain entry into like his respect of me as a soccer fan almost. But a lot of people in the English landscape take way more than that to get over that hump for American fans. And uh, I'll split it out as well. Like American fans are not appreciated for what we know and the knowledge that we have of the game.
Hmm.
There is no other fan in the world, at least in soccer, where you're going to watch, like, if you're watching this video, you're probably someone that just watched Joe Scally in a pregame or a preseason game for Borussia Mönchengladbach. Like, there's no Spanish person that's going to watch Morata every
Yeah.
time he plays a preseason game. There's no Italian person that's going to watch Verratti unless they're fans of that club.
Yeah.
Americans have this very unique way of appreciating the game where we're tracking and following so many clubs and players that in a way that spans a wider range than many people in England.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be fair and I'll say like Mexico is not too far away from us in how we track Europeans. I know that the Mexicans abroad is a big deal, and they also track their youth players. I see that a ton, so I do want to be fair to Mexico, and that is a soccer culture that I pay a lot of attention to because they're so close to us and they're our big rivals. But yeah, I mean, if you're England, if you're Spain, you're not going to be watching like the some player in the championship that's 18 years old, you know, that has a lot of hype around him. And whenever like the U.S. moved in for Yunus Musa, like there was some quotes from Southgate, but it wasn't like there was a lot of English fans that were crazy upset about losing Yunus Musa because they've got 10 Yunus Musas that
Exactly.
yeah. So
And no one that I've talked to has been like, oh man, can't believe Yunus Musa went to the US.
So we talked about the players, but let's talk about the league because MLS is a league that it's crazy to say this, but was founded like 25 years ago or something like that and has just been growing year over year. And there was a period there where it was really known and really was the retirement league where big time stars, there were big-time Premier League stars like Frank Lampard and David Beckham and Robbie Keane went to MLS to kind of finish out their careers. And whenever they arrived at MLS, specifically Robbie Keane and David Beckham too, to an extent, were dominant players. They were very good. Robbie Keane was one of the best forwards I can recall in MLS in recent memory. Is that attitude as MLS is a retirement league and nothing to take seriously something that's still going on? Is there any thought that maybe some players from MLS might be worth a look in England? Is there any consideration to the players that are going to say the Bundesliga or Serie A or the Spanish Premier Division? Is there any thought of that going on? I know that there's. I always forget this player's name. He was the attacking midfielder for Atlanta United who went to Newcastle. Yeah, so
Yes.
There are players that are going to the EPL, but I'm curious if that has evolved at all in the thinking from the English fans.
So it's a little bit harder from the English perspective, and I understand why this is that when an American player comes to the league and they do well, it's much more in their face that this person's nationality is American and they are talented. When an MLS player comes to the league, which usually isn't directly from MLS. Usually they've made a jump to maybe La Liga or Liga and then to Premier League, that it's very hard for them to understand the quality of MLS and how that's developed over the last 25 years. I also think there's a shortage of historians for MLS almost. Like you talked about it being 25 years old. There are now storied rivalries and there are now games that are kind of etched in the history books of MLS. I think about like the double post Portland penalty kick. That's just like an iconic MLS moment. You think about these rivalries and these hatreds that build up over time that aren't new anymore. And that really drives like the as fans what we can kind of point to as this is now a serious sport. This is a top 5 sport in the US. It's much harder unless you're really paying attention from an English perspective that the quality has really elevated. I'll say 2 more things on this. The first is that I was very surprised moving here that Sky Sports and another network called Free Sports, which is free when on television, carries MLS games
Yeah.
live. So it's you need to be up for it, whether it's 10 p.m. at night or midnight or 2 in the morning. MLS games are shown, and there's not a lot of other leagues that are shown on these channels without getting like a pay-per-view for La Liga. So in that sense, I really feel like we just need more players to come directly from MLS to the Premier League to then have them tell the story for us. Because players like Miguel Almiron, while his quality is obviously there and he deserves to be on the field for Newcastle, he hasn't exactly lit up any score sheets or anything like that. Part of that is to do with the team that he plays for, right? Like Newcastle isn't going to be banging down the doors of the Champions League anytime soon. But at the same time, I think we do need that kind of singular moment or singular player that's coming from MLS to really bang that door down for people that are insular in the way that they think about MLS and really specifically choose to pay attention to England.
And that's going to be very tough at the moment because I don't know if everyone out there is familiar with how the work permit situation works in the EPL, but essentially they have tiers of leagues, and depending on which tier of league that you play in, you can qualify for a work permit easier. I believe that MLS is in tier 4 or something like that, which means in order to actually qualify for a work permit to make a transfer to the EPL, you have to play like a significant amount of national team games. And that's going to be difficult at the moment because the quality of the U.S. national team has grown to the point that we're not seeing a tremendous amount of MLS players rack up a tremendous amount of caps for the national team. And the ones that are kind of older and probably aren't going to be making the transfer. So if you're someone like Caden Clark, for instance, you would have to be making a significant number of starts for the national team in order to qualify to make that transfer over to the EPL. And currently, just the way that it's set up, it would be really tough. So unless England decides to move the MLS into a higher tier to make it easier for those players to qualify, it's probably not going to happen that we see a ton of transfers from MLS directly to the EPL. But that's something I have been wondering about if the EPL would do that, considering the players that we're seeing moving to the Bundesliga and the Spanish League and the Italian League, if they would ever consider that. I know you probably don't have any insight on that. That's just something that I wonder about. Now, something you do have insight in that I'm very curious is you're actually a fairly accredited soccer coach. You have some accreditations in the United States, and you're also getting some over in England. So I'm curious if you notice a difference in the approach to the teaching side of the game whenever you're taking these classes to get these accreditations between the teaching that you're receiving in the United States to get USSF.
You got it. 2 S's,
accreditations, yeah. Or as opposed to the Europa accreditations.
Yeah. So for that question is really interesting because it is very apparent from the first moment you take an FA coaching license that the approach is the foundation to the approach is making sure that the players, the coaches, and everyone involved in that player's development loves the game and is involved in that development. Literally, the first class that you take in an FA coaching license is called Why We Love the Game. And that really sets the foundation for everything else that you'll talk about and learn about in the FA licenses. In the USSF licenses, you can be a parent or the most amateur coach with no soccer knowledge and go to that first class. And it starts off with, how do we set up training? So like, how do you have the players look at you? How do you accelerate your voice out to the players? How do you set up like how 1v1s and then small sided games move into full games? Like it's all very, how do you manage the practice and how do you manage the isolated development of the player while they're in practice? Whereas the English approach to coaching is much more holistic to the player and making sure like there is specific pieces of the course that talk about making sure you're communicating with parents, talking to them about what you're trying to teach them in the training, so that when they get in the car to go home, the kid is reinforcing that with their parent. The biggest difference between the two licenses, especially at the foundational level, is that the English approach is why the entire environment for the player is important to their development, and the American foundation is, how do we lead good practices? And once I got into the second layer of licenses, it does get a bit closer to true player development, certain styles of coaching, and how you can build in that tactician versus player development versus youth development. Like all of those things really align in the maybe more senior elevations of those licenses. But yeah, the biggest thing that stuck out to me was starting from that foundational FA license. It was all about how we can teach kids and players to love the game, how we can make it an inclusive game for everybody. And that really sets the stage for the rest of the coaching licenses in England.
That's interesting, man. I know whenever I think about English soccer, one word that comes to mind a lot is romance. Like there's like a romantic approach to the game. If you listen to the English commentators, the way they speak about it is almost poetic. The way that, during the whole European Super League fiasco, the English fans just spoke about the clubs, being of the people, and this is a game of the people, and just all this flowery language and romanticism that I don't know is something that's instilled in American culture when it comes to sports. Like, I mean, maybe there's some romance in basketball at a certain level. I don't know so much about in football, maybe, but in soccer, I don't know if that's the way that Americans even approach sports. But it's definitely something that's apparent in English sports, as at least whenever it comes to soccer, and we can see that in the "It's Coming Home" and all that. But that's very interesting that at the first class on level one, that why we love football is like something that's very important, and they want to talk about early on.
And to your point there, the romanticism of the sport here is founded in how the club teams founded themselves. Like West Ham is a team of iron workers that came from the factory that had a team together. All of these teams are instilled in the direct community that they're in England. And unless you're talking about, Manchester City or a club that was purchased and elevated from money, like even the Manchester Uniteds, the Arsenals, all of those teams had foundations and roots that were directly involved in the community. So for them, it does become personal when something like the Super League comes up, because these are clubs that are hundreds of years old, even longer if you're not counting like a first division team that their great grandparents and great 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 grandparents were supporting when they were younger. So I do understand that part of it, and there's not really an equivalent to the US. And I'll also say, like, the US sports teams can pick up and move overnight. They can just move to a new location, be in a new town, rebrand themselves. That's not really the case in England or European football in general. You really have to dissolve an entire club. Or I know this is kind of hypocritical. I realize I'm wearing a RB Leipzig jersey, which purchased a team in Germany in a very low division and then moved them up
Yeah.
to the Bundesliga. Um,
And I know
but
that AFC Wimbledon story, like that was a team
mhm,
that in England that actually moved places, but it's kind of a whole different discussion. I'm
yeah,
sorry to cut you off.
no, but you'll find people that when I ask them what team they support, and I'm expecting everyone to support a Premier League team, they'll say
Yeah.
Portsmouth because that's where I grew up. And that's the team that they watch and the game that they watch every weekend. They pay attention to what happens in the Premier League and they'll watch a big game, but it's Portsmouth to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now I watched your tactical breakdown of the Canadian game, which was a great video. You should be doing tactical breakdowns after every game. That was fantastic
I'm
and
coming
really
for you, Filippo.
really clued me into to some stuff that I didn't even see going on. So it got me thinking, especially someone with your background who's studying the game on the coaching level. How do you approach games whenever you watch them? Specifically, U.S. men's national team games that's like you're emotionally invested and you're not just kind of watching the game. Do you watch it as a fan or do you watch it looking for the tactical things going on? Does it take rewatches? What's your how do you approach that?
Usually, what happens when I watch a US men's national team game is I will try to remove myself from the coaching perspective and just enjoy.
Hmm.
But I've found myself in these Gold Cup games, especially the group stages, where it was very frustrating, I thought, to how we were approaching the game, where things as I was watching just kind of stuck out to me that seemed very important to the way that we were playing, or the way that, like Canada, for instance, they, about 30 minutes into the game, they switched Buchanan to the right and they started to overload Sam Vines. And that to me was kind of a specific thing that you can point to as a coach to say that person made a tactical adjustment
Hmm.
during the game. And then you can point to that and say, well, what did Greg do? And spoiler alert, Greg didn't really change anything.
But that was
And
also around the time where I forget one of the strikers had to leave the game and
yep.
a
So
midfielder came in
Akinola
from
had to leave the
Canada. Yeah.
game. Zimmerman was leaving the game. So a lot of
Zimmerman left
things
the
were
game, so
changing.
Pines
Yeah.
came in, so we lost a ball playing center back, and it just everything changed at that point.
Yeah. So, but to answer your question, long story short, if I'm watching US men's national team game, I'll try and remove myself as much as possible. And being in England, a lot of these Gold Cup games, they're 10 p.m. Eastern, so they're 3 a.m. my time. I have watched both 3 a.m. games in the Gold Cup so far. So it's very hard for me to
Yeah.
have the mental capacity from 3 to 5 in the morning, like waking up with 5 or 6 hours of sleep to take it from a coach's perspective. But especially if something stands out to me, that it kind of just puts that thought into my mind to go back later and watch what happened and between the two teams, like was there anything else that I can point out? And I'll also say, like, I'm not the end all be all of coaches. I'm not uh, a perfect analyst of the game. Greg
Absolutely.
is a much better and much more accomplished coach than I am. So when I do these breakdowns, it's really almost like a practice for me
Hmm.
of how can I take what I'm learning in these licenses and apply them and approach them to the real game.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, whenever you get to the level of like a Greg Berhalter or a Tata Martino or any of these professional coaches, I mean, these guys have been doing this their whole lives, and they have an accumulated hours in the game that's just kind of crazy for someone like me who's just sitting on the couch and like tweeting away. We probably don't see the game the same way they do. But one thing you mentioned in your breakdown did kind of change the perspective for me, and it's something that I've seen some other analysts talk about. Is in this Gold Cup, I think so much of the attention from the fan base has been about build up and about creativity and about goal creation and kind of our failure to do so. And I kind of switched my perspective into thinking that I don't think that that's what we're trying to do. Like, I think that we're trying to be defensive in this tournament. We're trying to negate the transition game. We're trying to negate opportunities. We're trying to force teams that if they're going to shoot, it's going to be from distance and allow our fantastic shot stopper of a keeper to do his thing. And we've seen throughout this Gold Cup, we have given up one goal, and that goal has been a penalty kick. And even before that, whenever we keep going back, I mean, we've given up this year, I think that we've given up 5 goals. I mean, in the Mexico game, one of them was that terrible mistake from Mark McKenzie, who basically just gave Tecatito just a one-on-one with Zach Steffen. One of them was, of course, that Tim Ream goal against Mexico. Then in Switzerland, one of them was a penalty. Was it a penalty kick? Did we? No, we stopped that penalty kick.
Yeah. We gave up a PK, but we stopped it.
Yeah, so there was 2 goals against Switzerland, but beyond that, we had a goal to Northern Ireland that I can't remember.
Yeah. Well, the last one against Switzerland was like Serginho Dest trying to heel flick it, and it went to one of their strikers.
Yeah, but
so it's kind of just been little mistakes here and there.
I think the approach has been just solidify that defense, especially in this Gold Cup tournament, because of just the lack of attacking options that we had coming in, specifically in the winger position. Just to let's not let anybody score. Let's shut down the transition, and just whatever we get on offense is what we get.
I think what a lot of people have to center themselves around, and I will genuinely give you lots of credit because you're one of the only people on YouTube doing US soccer videos that takes their time to really reflect on what that game meant and what happened, instead of giving like your, maybe you do it on Twitter, but like you're not giving your emotional approach to a reaction to the game. And I think what a lot of fans really don't do well is take that approach of reflection a day after, 2 days after, to really think about what that game meant. Because take the Canada game, for example. We have an early goal, and that means if we keep that lead, we win the group. Then our best center back goes down with an injury, and we have Donovan Pines in. And Canada has momentum throughout that first half. Like, if you're the coach and you're in that game, your thought process and priority is not, I want to play beautiful soccer and I want to play out of the back and I want to make the fans really happy about how we're playing. Your priority in that moment is to win the group and keep your lead. So I think as much as we can be frustrated about the way that we played and maybe the tactics that we deployed or the starting 11, I think that all has to be looked at with the perspective of what that actually meant in terms of what the coach was trying to do or what we wanted the outcome of that game to be. And too many people kind of watch the game, react to it, and then they've moved on. They're thinking about the next game against Jamaica or the next game against Qatar. And that's not really a healthy way to evaluate a coach or a player in that moment. And so for me, just again, Greg is not my favorite coach. I disagree with him on many decisions that he makes. And at the same time, to your point, you really do have to respect the amount of hours that these people have put into their craft. And he was not hired by his brother. He was hired because of the accolades and the approach and the genuine accomplishments that he had coaching in MLS. They might not have been as good as the accolades or the accomplishments of other coaches available. You can argue that, but you can't argue that he didn't have the experience needed to coach the team. And again, I'm saying this all from my perspective of he's probably not the coach that I want.
That hire was nuts. There's a lot of scar tissue there that hasn't quite healed, and I don't know if we'll ever actually get to the bottom of it. But like as you said, I mean, the guy had a solid Columbus team that had a solid system over the years, that had a defined play style that was very successful in MLS, and we see a lot of that coming into the national team, where there is a group, where there is a more or less defined play style that the players understand. I think the best articulation of that was seeing was seeing Paul Arriola in this first game. Paul Arriola was one of the veteran players that's been around Greg Berhalter for a long time, and we saw him working with Sebastian Lletget in the midfield and Kellen Acosta in the midfield, and it did look like they have a system going on. But whenever he had to exit the game due to injury, and Joaquini comes in, that's a player that has very little experience in Greg's system. He's had a couple of caps here and there, but not as many as Arriola, and all that cohesion kind of went out the window, and we kind of just had to start from scratch. But I do think that you keep saying the word perspective, and I think that that's so important because I think that as fans, we watch the game. You know, we watch the game with our hearts on our sleeves, and we care so much about the team that I think that like every shot on goal that the opposition has is just magnified times 10. Every time any player gets beat one-on-one, it's magnified by 10. If there's a player that you don't like and they lose the ball in midfield, that's magnified by 50. As opposed to, you know, if Christian Pulisic loses the ball against Mexico in the attack, we don't even see that. Like that kind of went in and out of our brain immediately. So whenever you go back and watch these games a second time and you start taking account of like that Canada game, for instance, it felt like in the second half that we were under siege and Canada was just coming at us right and left. But if you go back and look at it, a lot of those opportunities that Canada had, number one, were contested. They had a guy in front of them. And number two, were from outside the box or were from distance. And it wasn't like we were just like leaking like a sieve defensively. Like there was, it never felt like Canada was really gonna make something happen unless there was some type of mistake. And that's the perspective that I try to have, is whenever you look at it, say, like, if you were a fan of, say, Switzerland and you were looking at the U.S. men's national team, you would pull up the record and say, wow, the U.S. has only had one loss this year. They've beaten their biggest rival. They've won a final. They've come into this Gold Cup with a C team, and they seem to be doing fine. Like, this is a pretty strong squad. They got something going right here. And that doesn't seem to be the perspective of the fan base at all.
We like to be upset.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm just trying to say, and you talked about it, perspective, is just really think about what you're upset about and then put that against what the reality of the situation in the game is. Like, we have won every single game in the Gold Cup. We haven't lost a competitive game in 6 months, 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
we haven't tied many games. We have been winning games, which is unusual. It's even I compare us to Mexico, and I know people get upset about that, but I think Mexico is a great comparison because they're more or less the same quality as us, and they more or less play the same competition as us, and we always look at them as, you know, the measuring stick and the team that we should be better than within CONCACAF. And against the same competition, Mexico's not winning all their games. They've had some ties here and there. They've slipped up here and there, while the U.S. we keep winning. It's hard for me to be upset at a team that keeps winning.
Especially if you asked anyone before this tournament and looking at the roster and the lineup and the reaction that had, that this team would win their first 4 games in the tournament and be in the semifinal against Qatar, you're going to take that 7 out of 7 days of the week. Like, that is a great result. We've gotten players that needed international experience on the field playing 90 minutes. Gianluca Busio, Matthew Hoppe, Williamson, the first few games at least, James Sands. Like, there's so many players that
Miles
have
Robinson,
really developed.
Sam Vines.
Exactly. And you don't get that without hiccups. And one other point that I'll mention on the coaching piece is actually something that you talked to me, Sam, about in the interview on my channel with you, is there is a real value to bringing veterans on the team in the roster. And there's also a real value in having them on the field acting as kind of second coaches. So I'm not even talking about Paul Arriola being captain. Captain is an armband.
Yeah.
There are other people that are leaders on the field for the team that can compose everyone. I'm thinking about Kellen Acosta, Sebastian Lletget, these players that sometimes don't live up to the standards and expectations of the play that I want them to. But you also have to put that against the reason why they're on the field, especially for Greg. I think Greg really values that piece in the camp and on the field.
I think all
And
coaches do.
yeah, I think Greg values it a bit more than your everyday
Well,
coach, but that's not to say
going
it's
with
the
the
wrong
veteran,
decision.
going with the veteran over the young player is not like a Greg Berhalter specific thing. I mean, that is a
You're right.
universal thing.
Fair.
We're seeing it with the women's team right now, where they took a very veteran squad. I mean, I can remember years and years ago, whenever Brazil was heading to the World Cup, and the fans wanted this young player who was coming up in the Brazilian league named Neymar to come to the squad. I believe he was 17 years old at the time, and the coach decided to leave him off the roster. But that was, I mean, this is a discussion that is universal throughout every national team in the world.
Yeah. If you're thinking that Sebastian Leget's spot was actually Caden Clark's spot, you're wrong. It
Yeah,
was
I think you're
Gianluca
right.
Busio's spot or Eric Williamson's spot. Sebastian Leget's spot is there for a different reason than Caden Clark would be.
Yeah, and I actually put out the tweet this morning, and I'm getting some interesting responses back that I think we are coming to a time where the U.S. men's national team fan base is about to completely flip on its head, and fans are actually going to start to be upset that European-based players are being called up over MLS-based players. And the one that I see right now is I think we're going to see a time where like Jordan Peacock is going to be called up over like a Ricardo Pepi, and people are going to flip out.
Yeah.
Because they called up the European guy from the Switzerland league as opposed to the young kid in MLS who was bagging goals. So I see that we're about to come full circle in U.S. soccer fandom.
To
and
really
it's gonna
bring
be
it full
absolutely
circle,
ridiculous.
do you want to be England? Do you want to be MLS homers and value MLS over someone like Jordan Peacock?
I don't. I mean,
That's what someone in England would do.
and there's also the Pepe situation where he's a dual international, and there's that whole
Right. There's
other
many
layer.
factors.
Yeah,
I
there's
agree.
many factors. Now, speaking of England and speaking of young players, I know one of the things that you do on your video is put together highlight tapes of some of the young prospects out there, and two of the ones that you did recently are two players that I hear about constantly on Twitter. I get tweets. Do you think that they're going to make it to the national team? Do you think that they're going to join the USMNT? And I'm like, I have no idea. I've never spoken to these players. I've never heard them speak. But Alex Mighton is one, and Folarin Balogun is another. So tell me a little bit about these two players. Of these two players, who do you think has the bigger upside? When do you think that we'll start hearing from them at the senior level? And do you think that there's any shot that the U.S. men's national team can woo these players into representing the USMNT?
Sure. So I'll start with Balogun because I think his ceiling is a bit higher than Alex Mighton. He is a forward for Arsenal who's just been called up to the senior team this year. And he is a very technical number 9. He can really make a move in the box after receiving a pass, 1 touch, 2 touch, and really set up a shot for himself. He has scored on the senior team last year in the Europa League as well. So he's starting to show signs that he is capable of moving to a senior team in a top 5 league at a very young age. And he, for me, is almost the exact type of number 9 that we would want on our team. He's not necessarily a hold-up player, but he is someone that can really unlock a defense. And whether that's to get it out wide for a cross or to beat someone one-on-one and make a shot for himself, I feel like we've really missed that this Gold Cup, and someone like Matthew Hoppe is really the only person that's even trying something like that. So imagine a bit more technical Matthew Hoppe, someone that is coming up in a very high-pressure environment at Arsenal. And I think in terms of his allegiances, he, I think, would consider the U.S., and it seems like he feels a bit closer to the U.S. than Alex Mighton does. I'll get to Alex Mighton in a second, but Balogun follows a few of the U.S. internationals on Instagram. He's actually very close friends with Yunus Musa, who is also, if you'll recall, an English and American dual national.
Oh, I recall.
Yes.
He's a
So
Quattro national.
I think it's probably not likely that Balogun picks us, but in your dual national video, Sam, you talked about some of the other factors other than the nationality that you feel. And one of them is looking at the depth chart and seeing how realistic it is
Yeah.
that you're going to play internationally and at a World Cup. If I'm Balogun and I feel 60% confident that I want to pick England and 40% confident that I want to pick the US, and then I look at the English depth chart for
They have
strikers
so
and
many
I
young
see
strikers right now.
Harry Kane, I see Calvert-Lewin, I see 10 other people
Tammy
that,
Abraham's like
yeah,
20 years old, 21 years
exactly.
old, something like that.
So it,
Rashford. I mean, they've got guys. They've got guys.
yeah. So unless he absolutely blows it away at Arsenal, which I don't think he will get a ton of playing time with Lacazette and Aubameyang playing up top for Arsenal in a season that they need to win. They're not in any European championships this year.
Mhm.
So I don't really think that he will get a ton of playing time, although he's capable. And it doesn't look like he's going to go out on loan either. So that's Balogun. Alex Mighton
Let me
is
let me comment on Balogun real
sure.
quick. I,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be really interesting in the next couple of months because I think the striker position is. We thought that the striker position was going to be DK and Sargent for the next for the this cycle, but we saw from Sargent in the Nations League that it's certainly he didn't write his name in pen, and then DK in this Gold Cup has just not risen to the level that we've expected from him. Now, there's a lot of caveats with both players. They're both very young players, but I don't think either have kind of risen to that level. So it's going to be interesting. I would have thought that the best time for a Balogun to come in would be prior to qualifying, but all of a sudden we're going to be in qualifying in the next couple of months, and those caps are going to be tougher and tougher to come by. And we also have got players like Ricardo Pepi who are kind of waiting in the wings to kind of see what happens. But I'm curious what the threshold, what do you think the threshold would be for Balogun to actually get a call up? Like, does he need to get a transfer, like a loan move this season? It sounds like he's staying with Arsenal, so that's not in the cards. But like, does he have to get some senior team appearances and start looking good for Greg to risk a call up on this guy over like DK Sargent, PFOC, one of these guys?
I personally don't think so because of the way that our striker depth chart is looking. And I read a comment on Twitter, which I completely agree with, which is that Josh Sargent's stock has risen the most by not being at the Gold
Yeah,
Cup.
yeah,
And it's true. And I think for Balogun, he's shown enough at an age where we would take the chance on that because we just don't have a trusted forward. And we're kind of just like throwing things at the wall,
yeah.
hoping that it sticks at this point. And the first striker that takes that by the throat and starts scoring goals for the international team is probably going to be the striker that we take starting in our World Cup qualifiers. So I don't think it's required that Balogun goes out on loan or gets a ton of playing time because I think the risk reward to calling him in and playing him is higher than not doing that now
Yeah,
and
I can see
potentially
that.
losing out.
I don't know what our friendly schedule is going to be like coming up. I have a feeling that Balogun wouldn't want to be cap tied right away in like a qualifier or something like
Mhm.
that. But I have no doubt that if Greg says, "Hey, look, do you want to be our striker in the 2022 World Cup?" that
Yeah.
Balogun would say yes. I think that that's the biggest carrot on the stick. I always hear people talk about, are we reaching out to our dual internationals? Are we making them feel comfortable? Are we sending them baskets with gifts inside? Are we sending them text messages every day? But at the end of the day, I always say, if you say, "Hey, do you want to play in the World Cup?" and they don't have any other opportunity to play in the World Cup, they're going to go with you 9 times out of 10. But
Yep.
tell me about Alex Mighton.
Sure. So I'll finish up Balogun by transferring to Mighton by saying Balogun has been contacted by the Federation, not to come to a roster, but just gauging his
Yeah.
interest. Alex Mighton has not been contacted yet by all accounts and purposes and all the things that I've read about him, but he is eligible for the US. He's a winger for Nottingham Forest, so maybe agent Ethan Horvath can do some work for us this year to
Yeah.
get him to pick the US. He is a very, very fast, good dribbler that likes to play out wide and cut inside. So I wouldn't really equate him to any player that is currently on the roster. He plays quite similarly to Timothy Weah and actually Conrad De La Fuente. If you watch Conrad play, it's almost like his feet move too fast for his brain. And that's similar to Alex Mighton. It's just he almost moves too fast and plays too fast to not pick the right pass or pick the right shot. He is capable of a ceiling that is probably around where Timothy Way or Brendan Aronson is. I wouldn't say he is expected to hit the ceiling of a Christian Pulisic or Gio Reyna, but that's not to say he can't be an asset to the U.S.
Yeah.
national team. He he has not been reached out to by the federation, but he has said on record that if he was to talk to by Greg or someone from the federation, he would strongly consider the call up.
But that's what every player in the world says.
Right. And I think for Alex Mighton, he's even further away from the English depth chart. So if he wants any chance to play without kind of blowing up and moving to a Premier League team, he is not going to be near the senior team for England anytime soon.
But at the same time, probably the strongest position for the U.S. men's national team is that winger as well, because we have, the four guys who we saw in Nations League in Pulisic, Weah, Reyna, and Aronson, and then we have Conrad, who's going to be at Marseille this year. God, dude, I always say that wrong. Who's going to be at Marseille this year? We do have a recovering Jordan Morris, who is a fully capable player and would be a veteran. That would be tough for Berhalter to leave out of the squad as opposed to bringing in a young player like Mighton. And then we have Areola, who I know everybody's going to freak out that I said Areola, but he's definitely a veteran head that is just somebody that you would have to beat out in order to get that roster spot. So it's a pretty deep position pool. So it would be a lot tougher, in my opinion, for Mighton to get that call in, especially as we move into this period of World Cup qualifiers where the games are more important, where tension is rising, as opposed to this last 2 years where you can be very experimental and take a lot of chances. Yeah. So I do think that Balogun is a lot closer to the national team just because of the depth at striker as opposed to the depth at wing. But yeah, if
unless you're a number 9 or a fullback for the next decade, your spot is taken on the U.S. team.
Well, unless you're a Champions League player. I mean, that's pretty much where it's at right now. I know, I've heard people get upset about player after player after player for the national team, and we've just seen them get phased out as more players come in, and I think that's going to continue. I mean, we saw Will Trapp get phased out. We saw Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore. In this current tournament, Jackson Ewell had that one game, and then we really haven't seen much of him since. Christian Roldan was a big part of the 2019 Gold Cup. He has not been a big part of the national team ever since. I have no doubt that Sebastian Lletget is going to follow in that same path as more and more players come into the national team. But really, unless you're playing at a Champions League level, and I say Champions League, I'm not talking about Salzburg Champions League. I'm talking about like knockout round of the Champions League, Champions League. Your spot is not going to be guaranteed in the national team. That goes for, I think we saw in this Gold Cup that, hey, Reggie Cannon, I don't know if you're written in stone as much as we thought. I mean, Shaq Morris played pretty well. I'm not ready to go as far as to say that Shaq Moore is better than Reggie Cannon. I don't think that we've seen a game where Shaq Moore has really been put under pressure, like we've seen, like you spoke about, Sam Vines got really put under pressure. I don't know if we've seen that from Shaq Moore. I'm wondering if we play Mexico and Shaq Moore gets absolutely undressed by Tecatito, if all of a sudden the fans are going to turn on him too. But we also got Brian Reynolds out there in the wing. We got Julian Araujo that's kind of floating in the ether. So yeah, the depth for this national team has grown to the point where players like Folarin Balogun and Alex Mighton, where at one point we might have rolled out the red carpet to him and said, come in, come in, come in, we need you, you can be our savior. Now it's a little bit trickier, it's a little bit dicier.
I think the sales pitch is almost exactly what you said. To someone like Balogun, that we genuinely have a need for, is like, if you choose us, you have 10 years with Champions League level players surrounded by. And those are players that are winning the Champions League now. So be a part of this generation that genuinely has a chance to make a statement at the next few World Cups. And that's a strong story for people to be a part of. And especially when you think about it from a monetary perspective,
Oh yeah.
soccer continues to grow at an exponential rate in the States. And I really genuinely believe, especially living in England, that we will surprise many people when we play our next international tournament. And 4 years later, we host that thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's the big one. 2026 is the one that I think I've circled on my calendar as like uh, that's just going to change everything. I
yeah.
mean, the reason why we have MLS in this country is because of the 1994 World Cup that was
Hmm.
rolled into the bid that we would start our own domestic league, and that tournament really catapulted soccer from kind of a joke in this country to actually having a league, and it's sort of every World Cup has served to build and build and build and build on that. So by the time we come around to 2026, if we not only have a competitive team with like true global superstars on our team, but we also have the tournament in this country, and America loves it some America. They're going to go out there and support it. I think that by the time 2026 rolls around, I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing these incredible valuations for MLS
Hmm.
clubs. Why people think that MLS is going to be one of the premier leagues behind perhaps the Brazilian league in this hemisphere. One of the reasons why it seems like Liga MX is trying to just find any way possible to just join up with MLS and try to hitch their wagon, because not so much what we're seeing right now, not so much what we've seen in the past 5 years, but just that projection. There's going to be so many eyeballs in this sport in the coming years, and all this stuff we're talking about where we have these tremendous players, where we have this world tournament coming up where the eyes of the world is going to be on us, and then 4 years later where the eyes of the world are really going to be on us because it's in our own backyard. I mean, the sky is absolutely the limit.
Yeah. And if you think 2026 is far away, Gio Reyna is going to be 22 in
Yeah,
that tournament.
that's crazy.
This is the start, everyone. This is the start of a true rollout for what our academies did. What started in 1994 and then continued when early 2000s Jurgen Klinsmann then came in and started recruiting dual nationals. Like, all of this is a culmination of getting more serious and having a larger investment in the game in this country. And this is the best time to be an American soccer
And
fan.
we're
And
winning. We're winning every
yeah.
game. We
So
beat
yes,
Mexico. I
be
mean,
frustrated, be whatever you want to be, but just know that it is a good time. It is an amazing time to love this sport and love this country's sport.
absolutely. Let's wrap it up right there. Let me ask you a few questions just to put a bow on this whole thing. My first question that I want to ask you is, what is your all-time favorite U.S. men's national team jersey?
I really love the Waldos. I hate to
Have
be
to.
cliche, but that is far and away my favorite. Yeah, and then the bomb pop is a dark horse for me. But
That's a great one.
yeah,
So, whenever you're watching a U.S. men's national team game, maybe tomorrow night against Qatar, uh, what what do you have any rituals? Do you have any superstitions or anything like that? I know it's very late for you watching it, but let's say lateness isn't a factor. Let's say it's just a normal time for you to be watching a game. What is your setup going into a game?
I always have a jersey on, and when I wake up at 3 in the morning, I will fold my jersey up and put it next to my bed and put it on as I creep out of bed to not wake my wife up and go to my computer to stream the game. Um, Usually, if it's a stressful game, I will be standing and pacing in front of my
Oh yeah.
television, and I don't really yell, but I will definitely have some hands on head moments and frustrations and joyous moments.
Oh yeah. I think my celebrations for goals are better than the player celebrations. I just kind of
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Jake, thank you so much for coming on. Real quick, can you tell everybody about FIFA America, what you're doing over there, what kind of content they can expect whenever they click on your name?
Sure. So right now I'm doing a series 30 and 30, which I'm just making a new video every day based around US national teams. The channel itself going forward will be US national teams and MLS and Yanks abroad, really taking the view of that analytical approach and the perspective that we talked about earlier in the episode. So there's enough people out there like yourself, Sam, like Tack or Pete, that are really building an excitement and an energy around the US game. And I'm really trying to add to that to any new fans and any veteran fans that really want to be thinking about the game in a bit more detail and really try to ingest what's happening on the field. So really, that's just my goal, is to help the game grow in America. The channel is growing very quickly, more than I could have ever hoped for. So if you want to be a part of it, this community has been amazing, Sam included, in helping with that. So really appreciate you guys checking out any of my videos. And yeah, just thanks for having me on. I really do appreciate it.
And you're also a great follow on Twitter. What's the Twitter handle?
American FIF.
Yeah,
FIFAmerica was taken.
I'm
Report Yank.
I'm Report Yank. Filippo is manager tactical. Like, it's all backwards.
Someone from the future had known we were coming.
On behalf of Jake from FIFAmerica and on behalf of Jake's cat, thank you guys so much for tuning in and hanging out while we talk soccer. My name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report.